Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Send It. I'm here with my esteemed colleague and co-host, Waj. How are you, my friend?
I'm very good. I'm excited for this one. Layer Zero is a protocol that I've been using a lot myself, and I think it's always great to speak to the people behind it as well.
Man, I'm really excited about this one. I know that we've been working for a while to get these guys on here to talk about probably like the biggest thing that we've talked about yet on the podcast. What wouldn't you say? In a way,
I mean, in terms of size, definitely.
Yeah. Like up till now, we usually talked like with protocols or wallets, but I think that Layer Zero and its vision, at least the way it sounded to me when I first heard about it, or when I hear people talk about it, it was like, okay, this is a whole new. This is a whole new era of crypto that I didn't even knew that existed or could exist. And definitely for me personally, I can say that it was the first time that I started being like really curious about everything related to the word Omni in crypto, because it's a narrative that for sure for me, like I used to like probably be scared of in a way. Like, I don't know, I just used to avoid it mostly. So today we're lucky to have not just one Matt from Layer Zero, but two. And by the way, they say it's a title there over there at Layer Zero, and they might be telling the truth, to be honest. So first of all, thanks for coming, guys, and very excited about talking to talk to you guys for the first time about Layer Zero. But first, maybe you can introduce yourself a bit. Like, how did you even get into the space? And how long have you been in Layer Zero? How did you get to it? Take it.
Sure. Happy to jump in. I'll be the first Matt to go. My name is Matt Crack. Feel free to refer to me just as Crack for the rest of the talk. I've been in crypto now for probably the last 4 years. It started early with the university scene, so doing a lot of work, mainly with just education, doing first initiatives at my local college, helping people understand how to build on top of Ethereum and like the EVM. From there, got connected with a lot of really smart builders across the United States and around the world. Was really, really interested at first with obviously the idea of permissionless store of value, Bitcoin, from there Ethereum with permissionless applications. And from there, it really just kind of spiraled into diving into all things related to how to extend permissionless interoperability for basically everybody, right? Being able to build applications that no one has direct centralized control over, that anyone can access with around the world and has no kind of rails to prevent you from, achieving whatever your goals are on chain. For me, currently, I'm a developer ecosystem lead at Layer Zero, coming up on a year anniversary. It's been really, really fun working with the team here. Layer Zero, kind of like you guys introed with, has an incredibly interesting mission and very ambitious around connecting this fragmented blockchain ecosystem. And so incredibly excited to be able to contribute to that, working day in, day out with some of the best projects, best teams, best chains to kind of see and kind of push the boundary of what you can really build within this industry. So thanks so much for having me.
For sure.
Awesome. I'm the second Matt, so I'll go. My name is Matt. I'm at Layer Zero. I've been here for roughly 14 months now, so a little over a year. Started in the space actually in like 2013, was mining Bitcoin, was not serious about the space in general. And then fast forward 2017 to 2020, did a lot of trading, graduated university, was a comp sci major, so worked at Amazon and then Coinbase as an engineer. After that, moved to like a Web3 hedge fund based out of Korea, so did a lot of cool venture and liquid trading there, and then moved up to Layer Zero a year later. So a little background in a little different areas in crypto, but overall, love the technical side of how things work. And Layer Zero obviously is one of the most technical products in the space, and also like accomplishing a lot of really cool things and problems to solve. So yeah, great to be here.
Great to have you guys on, to be honest. Great to have you guys on, and excited to dive into to Layer Zero. And with this show with the Send It podcast, especially unlike most of the content that we do so far on Leviathan on the Daily Show, like we kind of wanted to be more of an introductory kind of show to really allow people who even if they're not like well educated already and know about everything that that all these like different layers and technologies already are. So I kind of wanted us to really like get into the roots of things and try to, at least at the beginning, keep it as simple as possible to really give a chance to people to like to understand what we're referring to here and why probably like we are also excited about it. For sure, you guys who are so well trenched into it. So I will ask it like this, first of all, like what is layer zero, basically, at all, and how is it different from any like other like name that the normal user is hearing out there as I don't know, a blockchain, a protocol, or whatever? And mostly, like, what are like the key features or like solutions that are now going to be available for users because of layer zero?
Sure. Happy to take this one. So I think let's first put in the scope of where it sits compared to some of the other largest projects in blockchain. We think of layer zero as a primitive. So for us, what that means is that it's on par with Bitcoin or Ethereum. You think of Bitcoin, right, as the first use case for decentralized store of value. You think of Ethereum as kind of decentralized finance, expanding upon just the sole transaction nature of Bitcoin. We view layer zero as the decentralized internet. You can think of it super similar to TCP/IP for Web 2, connecting all of these fragmented blockchain ecosystems using a common and uniform syntax. What that actually means in practice for the average user and what makes it kind of useful for the average developer is that essentially any blockchain network that is a state machine, so keeps track of state transitions over time, and has the properties of just a general ledger that's permissionless, can be incorporated with layer zero using a layer zero endpoint, and then incorporated into the existing mesh network that was already live. Today, layer zero is live on 50 plus supported blockchains. And what that means for developers moving forward is that layer zero is a permissionless, immutable, and censorship resistant way to move any arbitrary data between any existing or new blockchain networks. And that's really what we're here to talk about.
So basically what you guys are saying, that all of a sudden, the amount of possibility that the user that is on one network like is going to increase several magnitudes to the fact that all of a sudden I'm on a specific network, and it doesn't matter on which network I am. I'm going to actually be able to interact with whatever protocol on other network. And if so, is it really like every protocol on every network, like even like the weird ones, you know?
Yeah, there's two layers to it, I think, and Matt will probably touch on this right after. Within layer zero, there's two problem areas that we're trying to solve. The first of which is this broad issue of verification. How do you validate that a message that you want to send from chain A should actually be delivered to chain B? And the problem here is kind of twofold. Historically, if you look at how bridging worked over time, there was this concept of monolithic bridge security. So you can think of this as a centralized provider that just checks for messages on chain A and writes them to chain B. You can think of it as a collection of different signers that sign off that the message is valid. You can think of it even as like a middle blockchain that sits in the middle between point A and point B. But the point is, there's one kind of validation technique that sits in the middle that every application on top of that network uses to send messages from point A to point B. But the problem is, at some point that validation technique fails, whether it's due to a backdoor into the software that enabled that message, whether it's literally just centralized and the user decides to rug using that centralized method, whether the middle chain doesn't have enough client diversity within their nodes, and so the nodes push a bad update that becomes faulty. There's some backdoor or some problem that gets issued that breaks that validation. And what that means for the average user is that every application built on top of that validation technique is now at risk. And we've seen this happen time and time again. If you look at the wormhole hack that happened a few years back, this was literally the exact issue. They had their Guardian network all using the same client software for their validators. There was a backdoor into the client software. A hacker was able to get in, sign a message that was valid, even though nobody signed off on it on the source chain. And then suddenly you have millions of dollars at risk. If you look actually at the Rect leaderboard, you can go rect.leaderboard. 4 out of the 5 largest hacks that have happened in crypto are all related to this concept of one validation technique breaking a bridge and then having funds stolen. And so for us, we think of layer 0 as a way to get around this issue of monolithic bridge security. Instead of actually having the validation layer be one single validation technique, layer 0 enables you to configure essentially any validation method that enables you to check, hey, has a message moved from point A to point B? That could be as an application developer running my own decentralized verifier network that we offer. You could be plugging into 25 plus different validation techniques that we offer as part of our message libraries. But the point being is that suddenly you now, as a developer, have control over the size and scope of this security stack. And what that means as a developer is that you're now future-proof. As new best practices come into play, we saw this happen with zero-knowledge proofs over the last year and a half. You're suddenly able to now roll in new validation techniques into your existing deployed application without needing to redeploy contracts, move to a new chain, et cetera, et cetera. And so from the validation standpoint, layer 0 is a huge upgrade for developers. And then what you were talking about the protocol level interactions. How do I, as a DeFi user, benefit from this? The execution layer is the second piece that layer 0 tackles. Now, using the layer 0 protocol, we have this concept of permissionless execution, which means once a message gets verified by an application's validation techniques, then anybody can come on that destination chain and permissionlessly execute that message. And what that looks like is that now you suddenly have this domain space where different providers can run these executors on the destination chain. And using layer 0, what that means as a user is I can pay for gas on the source chain, a quote basically for how much it's going to cost to run on the destination, and have that message permissionlessly executed for me on my behalf. And so as a user, what that means is from like a token perspective, I can pay to have a token delivered to the destination chain, delivered to a destination wallet without me ever needing the destination gas token, without me ever needing to sign a transaction on the destination. And I can then have composability from that. I can, as a developer, say, when that token is received, I also want it to be staked, to be swapped, to be burnt, to be locked, to be loaned, whatever it may be. You can take any arbitrary data and add these composable legs within the execution as a developer. So high level, what layer 0 is solving for, validation, we make it where you're no longer locked into one monolithic model that potentially can be break, become outdated, et cetera. And we enable this permissionless message execution where suddenly you have this marketplace of message executors that will execute messages on your behalf. And since we know they're already validated because of these validation techniques, anyone can then go and execute them without needing to worry about what that state transition brings.
I'd like to go in a little bit more detail there, if that's okay, just especially on the last point that you mentioned, talking about how anyone can permissionlessly become an executor. Tell us more about that. How does that work exactly?
Sure. So currently today, the way that like a default application that's deployed on layer 0 works is if you deploy an application on your source chain, application on your destination chain, that source application has what's called a message library. That message library is an append-only validation library. What that means is there are different libraries that get added that can be updated over time, but you can't change the core libraries. It's not an upgradable contract. It just appends to the registry that developers can point to. So if I say, hey, I want to point to this new validation library, my application can start using all the configurations available within it. At the actual configuration level, I, as a developer and the contract owner, can say, I want this executor to be used for my layer 0 omni-chain application. And what that means is when I call the layer 0 endpoint contract, that's like the core interface on the source chain to send your message, right? When I call that interface, what happens is I can generate a quote for how much it's going to cost to execute that message on the destination chain. As a developer, I can literally pass in the actual gas units I want to use on the destination chain. It'll generate a quote for how much it'll cost to swap your source chain gas token for the destination token. And then that message, once it's been successfully validated, can then be executed on the destination by that executor. In terms of how you actually set up a permissionless executor, it's fairly straightforward. The way the actual protocol works is that once messages have been validated, anybody can go to the destination and call that execution method because we know that it's a valid message. So you can have a marketplace where I say, hey, I've configured this executor to go ahead and do that gas abstraction for me, go and execute that message on my behalf. But let's say we're in a world where that executor dies for whatever reason. That is not a limiting factor for your application. You're not dependent on that executor. Anything can come and fill the void if, let's say, that specific executor goes down. Anyone can go and permissionlessly just call the LZ receive method on the destination chain, deliver that message. It'll have all of the information about where it's supposed to go already. But the really cool thing is that this creates kind of like a marketplace, right, for both validation, where different validation techniques battle each other to see which one is the best in terms of cost efficiency, in terms of security, et cetera. In terms of execution, same thing. Whoever provides the cheapest and most efficient uptime of that message execution, they're going to win out on the execution landscape. And so for us, it's very, very cool to see, because it means that, one, applications don't have to subscribe to a one-size-fits-all model, right? You have tons of configurability on what your use case is. If you're securing millions and millions of dollars, right, of TVL, you can have an arbitrary length of that security stack with multiple different validation techniques. But if I'm moving 20-cent NFTs, I might not need that huge scope and domain of validation. And so I can choose for something smaller that fits my use case, or have configurability on a case-by-case basis.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant, because literally, as you mentioned, if you're a money market like Aave, you're going to want some pretty top tier security. But if you're like a meme coin moving from one chain to another, you might want to focus a little bit more on the pricing.
Exactly. And the really cool thing is, when we talk about future proofing, we literally saw this happen. Polyhedra, their ZK bridge, is now a validation client that you can use within layer 0. And previously, like 2 years ago, nobody thought zero knowledge proofs were even realistic to be used in the blockchain space for at least another 10 years out. But suddenly you have all of these providers. It's probably the biggest namespace now in crypto. And it's easy to just add that into layer 0's existing validation libraries as a new security setup. And now every application on layer 0, using the same access controls you would use for any other contract, right, can now configure to that validation library in a way that's permissionless. They don't have to rely on layer 0 essentially for that integration.
Don't need to talk to them. No, they don't need anything. Like the process is completely probably permissionless. Like you don't need to know anyone, talk to anyone, ask anyone. You just plug it in.
Exactly. The way that the message libraries work right now is that layer 0 labs can append new message libraries into the basically registry of different libraries to choose from. But also you have the ability to configure your own decentralized DVN. You don't have to rely on layer 0 to add it for you. So yeah, anyone can configure essentially anything within their security stack for their application.
Guys, can we touch on that? Like I actually wanted to get to that a bit later, but if you already mentioned it, then it's better to ask now, I think. When I started reading about layer 0, there are so many new terms that even if you think that you know some stuff about a specific sector in crypto, or like within a specific niche, then all of a sudden I was like, okay, there's a bunch of whole new names here that I really have no idea about, what are they? And I think that one of them is something you've just mentioned called DVN. So maybe you guys can explain a bit about what is DVN, what is OFT, by the way, maybe we can get to later as well, and all kinds of terms that are like similar to terms that I know from crypto, but they have like a little twist. So it's like, okay, do I really know what it means? No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I could take this one. So DVN is, Matt was actually, or Crack was speaking about it earlier. It's the Decentralized Verifier Network. And this is like sort of like almost any entity can spin up permissionlessly their own DVN that can help verify and secure messages going from chain A to chain B. And this is like completely different than pretty much anyone else in the industry, right? And so what essentially we were solving with the DVNs in general was the ability for an application to actually choose how they want to be secured and kind of own that security dynamic versus being forced to use some static security model, right? And most of the hacks that have happened in the past, if you can imagine, if I forced you to use one security model and every application building on me was using only that same exact model, if that protocol ever got hacked, if those, we'll just say those verifiers ever got hacked for some reason, every application is now affected by that automatically. And those applications never had a choice how they want to be secured. They never had a choice on what that looks like, who is behind them, the transparency, everything around that. And so the DVNs are a way for applications to actually kind of like manage how they want to be secured. They can choose based on cost, security, etc. But giving them the optionality and the flexibility to actually own that themselves and to be able to choose and have transparency around that is sort of like the goal for the DVNs in the first place. So DVN is essentially just a decentralized verifier network. We have, I think, around 30 plus live currently. We have many more coming on board. So any application building on top of Layer 0 Rails can choose whatever DVNs they want included to kind of secure their own messaging.
And
this
what
is
happens
something
if
that the network chooses, or is it something that the user itself in some way can choose?
Yeah, so this is something that when we talk about users for Layer 0, they're more the developers who are building these applications. So the developers and the dApps that are building can choose which DVNs they want for the messaging. So you can mix and match, right? So like if you wanted to choose from like 10 DVNs, you can choose 10 DVNs, and you can require a few of them. So if you want, say, I want this one, this one, this one, for every transaction they have to be required, you can choose that out of the subset of like 10 or 20 or 30. So it's really up to the application to choose how many they want, how flexible they want to be. And Waj gave the perfect example, right? Like if you're Aave doing like $100 million cross-chain liquidation, you're probably going to want the most security possible, right? And you want to require as many as you can. And that might cost you a little bit more, but you're willing to take it because of like the opportunity available. Versus if you're like a meme coin or like a free NFT mint that has like no financial consequences at all, you're probably willing to opt out of having like 30 DVNs secure your messaging, maybe only choose from a few of them. So it's really flexible. And the whole idea is like there is no reason why we should have an opinion and force you guys to choose from a certain set. You guys should be able to choose your own however you want. Like you don't have to even touch Layer 0 if you don't want to. You can kind of choose from any other ones. So flexibility and optionality are kind of like our core thesis, and that's sort of like what the DVNs are doing here.
I just wanted to ask.
And I think.
Go ahead,
Go ahead, Crack.
Oh, well, I just wanted to tack on there too. I think it'd be great to kind of like jump into after that kind of what the competitor like comparison is, right, with other Layer 0-esque solutions, right, and see how that stacks up validation wise.
Can you maybe elaborate on that a bit?
For sure. So, for example, like if you take the case of like Polkadot, right? Polkadot had another narrative that was similar to being a Layer 0, right? Akin to this one primitive that everyone would use to start moving messages between chains.
That was what. That was, by the way, like when I was early in crypto, there were like two main, like the way I was funneled into it. I mean, probably there were like two main actors within the interoperability space. Like the way I was presenting and like experiencing it. One was Chainlink with CCIP, and like especially after they introduced CCIP and started like discussing and describing more and more what it's going to be. And the other was Polkadot, where that was the first time that I ever heard like terms of like, I don't know, blockchain of blockchains, and even specifically the term Layer 0, by the way. The first time I've ever encountered it was in my early years in crypto, probably 2020 or maybe 2021 it was, about like it being like the layer that connects everything, and everything can be recreated on Polkadot or something like that. So for sure, I'm very curious about like the differences, the different approaches and designs maybe that you guys are taking.
Yeah, I think actually comparing them, it brings up a lot of kind of the drawbacks of some of these solutions. I'll start with Polkadot and then roll into CCIP. With Polkadot, the idea of it being a Layer 0 isn't entirely true. The way you can think of it is actually it's an L1, Layer 1 blockchain, right? Which has the concept of this relay chain and all of these sub-networks underneath it called parachains using their substrate framework. So the way that Polkadot envisions interoperability is that everyone will deploy these parachains underneath the main relay chain, right? And the relay acts as a hub and spoke model to move messages between the relay chain to all of the different parachains underneath. The problem is that these parachains are built only using the substrate framework, which means that it's a brand new language for developers to write in. It's also not directly compatible with existing external networks like Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. And so what that means from a developer experience is that it has interoperability, but only within its fragmented window of what the blockchain space is within the Polkadot ecosystem. And their way around this is with this chain called Moonbeam. So Moonbeam is another parachain that sits underneath the Relay network, and it's EVM compatible, but also based on this substrate framework. And the way that it works is you can use a third-party bridge like Layer 0 or CCIP to move messages into this EVM compatible network, Moonbeam, and then connect to the rest of the Polkadot ecosystem. But the problem is you have to use this one entry point to get in to all of the Polkadot ecosystem. And there's no native way to actually have Ethereum communicate directly to the rest of the Polkadot ecosystem. It has to be moved through Moonbeam. And in general, you actually need Layer 0 or CCIP to move messages into Moonbeam to connect all this fragmented liquidity that's within the EVM ecosystem, within the Solana ecosystem, within the Cosmos ecosystem, etc. So it's not a true Layer 0 because it only extends interoperability natively to the chains that are built directly underneath that relay network within the parachain ecosystem. And what that means actually is that you're creating more fragmentation, you're blocking access to existing data liquidity. It makes it a lot harder for the average developer to touch. CCIP gets a little bit closer to this vision of Layer 0, but there's still some really key problems here. With CCIP, you have the concept of the Dawn network, right? The Dawn network is essentially their monolithic bridge security, their validation technique for checking to make sure that messages are valid from chain A to chain B. The problem is that you're essentially trusting the Dawn network and its risk management framework as this validation technique to move messages on your behalf. And you're also trusting that CCIP won't be monopolistic and essentially block you from sending messages or increase the fee to make them unfeasible. If you actually look at the CCIP network right now, they impose a premium for using anything besides their link token as the gas token, right? If you don't use link on CCIP, you pay an additional 10% fee on your bridging, which means that essentially every dApp is locked into this model that CCIP can control on the fee that you pay from chain A to chain B. And you're locked into using only their validation method. So you're essentially stuck once you use CCIP with all of your contracts needing to kind of bend a knee, so to speak, to what CCIP imposes on you, the developer. With Layer 0, we actually offer CCIP as one of these decentralized verifier networks within the stack. But what that means is that if CCIP becomes egregious, right, and starts charging everyone 50, 60% fees on their messaging, you as a developer can say, hey, there's a marketplace of all these other validation techniques that are way better, cheaper, more efficient. I'm going to start using them and start Xing out CCIP entirely from my validation stack. And that means that you don't have to redeploy contracts. You don't have to migrate to a different bridging technique or platform. And overall, as a developer, you're still plugged in to multiple validation techniques and multiple chains. From the chain standpoint, what that means for Layer 0 is that we kind of solve the problems of both Polkadot and CCIP directly. We solve Polkadot because a Layer 0 endpoint can be deployed on any blockchain ledger broadly, right? So that means the EVM, that means that the Solana VM can be potentially added with the Layer 0 endpoint, same for the Cosmos VM. Essentially any VM that chains use that have those two principles, right? State propagation and just base ledger technology. And we solve the problem of CCIP where you're locked into one validation technique where potentially you have monopolistic interest working against you, the average developer. You suddenly have a free and open marketplace for validation and a free and open marketplace for execution. And so that is kind of the big innovation for us that we see with Layer 0, this ability to give developers an unopinionated way to move messages from point A to point B without having to lock you into one design framework, one developer framework like Substrate, and also without needing to lock you into one validation technique like CCIP.
No, awesome. You really explained that well. I wanted to add on Axelar and Wormhole. How does Layer 0 compare to them?
Yeah, happy.
Yeah,
go ahead, Craig.
Go ahead, Matt. No, go for it. I've been talking too much.
And I like the way, I like the fact that you guys are so enthusiastic. when you share about it and like when you explain this kind of stuff, it really feels like that you really are feeling that you're creating something big. And even if just by these two examples that Crack just explained to us the past few minutes, I think that already, like, for me, I didn't know a lot of that stuff, especially the Polkadot part. When you mentioned that they actually have to they have to use something like layer 0 or CCIP anyway. So it's like not exactly definitely not what I thought it was for sure. And very curious about what Waj is asking now about also like stuff like Axelar and Wormhole. And yeah, by the way, Kervans is also using a Wormhole, right? Waj, or don't you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of protocols using Wormhole, but they're like apps themselves, just like there are lots of apps on layer 0 too.
Go ahead, guys. Didn't mean to.
No, I'll give a brief high level overview on sort of like Axelar wormhole in comparison to like layer 0. And like you said, I think we're passionate because this stuff matters a lot, right? At the end of the day, when you're building a cross-chain application, the one thing in mind is security, right? Like it's the turkey meme that everyone shares around, but like turkey lives the happiest life. And then one day it just like gets its head chopped off and goes to zero, right? And so like DeFi protocols, games, all of these would love to kind of have them learn and, understand how to price risk more accordingly. And so, for us, this is like super important. And so, glad that you can kind of see the passion in it. But in terms of like Axelar and Wormhole, Axelar is using what's called like a middle chain, right, for security and to relay messages. And so if you're going from chain A to chain B, what Axelar is doing is taking the message from chain A, bringing it to their middle chain, verifying it in their middle chain, then resending it out to their destination chain. Now, there's a few, flaws with this and pros and cons, but essentially what this means is that middle chain is kind of like the arbiter of truth and the source of, how messages actually get delivered to the destination chain. So if Axelar, as a middle chain, ever got hacked, they could theoretically send sort of like any arbitrary false payloads to whatever, applications across different networks they want. And, that's kind of like the end game there. And they're, secured by their proof of stake network, which, is dependent on their token, the price of it, etc. And so there's a lot going on there. And also in terms of latency, now you actually have to wait for that middle chain to confirm those transactions. And so there's kind of like chain A, chain B, and chain C for every single transaction. And layer 0 has been operating and doing one of our executors like 40 to 50 billion RPC calls every single month to kind of put that onto like one specific network, and how that scale out is pretty crazy to think about. And so middle chains have a few different pros and cons in that sense, and it's not as efficient and effective and cost friendly for a lot of cross-chain applications. And so that is sort of like the Axelar comparison. In terms of Wormhole, we spoke earlier about this. Crack explained that we truly care about immutability for many different reasons. Wormhole uses upgradable smart contracts for their core libraries, their messaging, etc. And what this basically means is that at any time, their core team can make changes to the code itself that can then affect every application building on top of it. And we saw this happen with the Wormhole hack earlier. It's happened a few times after that as well with white hackers. But at the end of the day, the whole thesis is, if you're going to be transferring billions and billions of dollars between different networks on top of a messaging protocol like layer 0, we've done 50 billion, I think over 2 years now. There is no reason why you should be building on top of Rails that at any moment can change the underlying tech and can kind of like affect every single person building on it. It's kind of a crazy idea and concept to think about. And so we chose immutable smart contracts, very similar to like how Uniswap works in that sense, right? Like Uniswap has acquired billions and billions of LP because the people providing that liquidity are comfortable with those smart contracts. They have full transparency. They know that that's not going to change no matter what. It's by design, it's immutable. Same thing with layer 0. When you're building on top of layer 0, whatever library you choose, you know that it's immutable by nature, and then you can trust that it's going to act accordingly. And so there are guarantees in how that design works versus an upgradable smart contract, right? At any moment, you have no idea what's going to happen, and you're kind of just trusting that the core team is not going to act maliciously. But even if they have good intentions, again, the people behind those smart contracts are human, and mistakes happen all the time. And so, at the risk of that happening, we don't want every application to kind of get rugged because of a simple error like that. And so wormhole, the upgradability is, one of like the largest differences. Crack can probably explain more on the technical side, but yeah, those are some of the few ones.
Yeah, jumping in here too, I think from even the middle chain standpoint, like Matt was talking about, right? This idea that everything hinges on this middle blockchain for validating messages. You're putting a ton of faith and trust into that middle network that they're actually capable of verifying messages legitimately. Even with Ethereum, we saw issues where I think a couple months ago we saw that 80% of the node clients are run on Geth, right? And then 20% are run by Nethermind, and so on and so forth, right? What that means is that if there's one bad update pushed to the majority client on those nodes, you can have validation issues even on Ethereum. This is something that they're actively trying to solve and scale. But if you think that Ethereum, the primitive that it is, right, still has these issues with diversity and with making sure that node validation is up to snuff, you're definitely going to run into this issue too with middle chains as well. Like Matt was saying with upgradable contracts, the other piece that's interesting there is that it happens all the time. Literally 2 months ago, Socket ran into this exact issue with upgradable contracts where they pushed, I believe, an improper router contract on a destination chain that allowed a developer to pass any arbitrary call in on the destination. And what that essentially happened was they were able to drain every wallet that had interacted with Socket because of an upgradable smart contract that was implemented. We talk about immutability being one of our core principles so much because it really is important. If you don't have immutability, you don't have security. Also, on kind of how does Layer 0, enable developers to make their own decisions, we allow you to actually configure Axelar and CCIP as decentralized verifier networks as part of your security stack. The point for us is that we will try and do the best we can to educate developers about what the best security practice looks like for interoperability, what developers should do when they're designing their applications. But ultimately, we're unopinionated. We have just put into our protocol that it has to be permissionless, censorship resistant, and immutable. Any developer can use any validation assumptions that they have and what they believe is most secure to secure their application. And so instead of allocating trust into someone else's assumptions about what they've researched and what they've implemented, you as a developer say, I know what I want for my application. Let me use Layer 0 to build that application.
And the last thing I'll add there, right, I don't want to add too much, is that these three core principles, that, immutability, permissionless, and censorship resistant, they go hand in hand. So if you have upgradable smart contracts, you completely lose the idea of having censorship resistance, right? So that means at any moment, any entity, whether it be the government or anyone else, could literally go in, change the code, and affect every application building. So you actually can censor anytime, at any moment, and the users don't have control over that. And so you actually need immutability if you want censorship resistance as well, because once that code's out there, right, like no one can touch it, it's there, right? Like Uniswap, no one can actually change how the protocol works. Obviously, you can build front ends that kind of filter and do different, things, but at the core protocol level, you can still use those Uniswap contracts however you would like because they are immutable. No one can censor that. But once you introduce upgradability, now you have this different vector that anyone can go in, change the code, and affect everyone building on it. And you can censor messages. You can do whatever you want. So these three go hand in hand. And this is why we care so much about it, because if you sacrifice one of those pillars, you sacrifice all of them.
Makes sense. Does this mean, because of the immutable nature of this, just like Uniswap, will we end up eventually, as the tech progresses over the years, over the decades, will we eventually see like a Layer 0 version 2, version 3, version 4, where you kind of like, just like Uniswap, you have the access to the old contracts, but like people kind of use the latest version?
Yeah, we actually just rolled out Layer 0 v2, and what that actually means for developers is there's a new version of our endpoint contract. The endpoint is the immutable interface, right, that enables you to send from point A to point B. What that means is that there's kind of two paths to adding improvements to the protocol. Anything that's in contract that is specific for improving, let's say, like gas optimization, for message throughput, things like that that are in contract code. We deploy new endpoint contracts. So that was Layer 0 v2 that recently rolled out. in terms of validation and execution, we are able to have a lot more flexibility with this using those message libraries that I talked about. So on layer 0 v1 and on layer 0 v2, you have the endpoint as the interface, and then underneath the endpoint are these message libraries that any developer can configure and choose all of those specific application settings for messaging. Those libraries are append only. So what that means is layer 0 releases a library with different configurations within them. Any developer can go and select that library, but as new best practices come out, let's say for proof mechanisms, for different validation techniques, we can add them in appended to that registry as kind of like a happy path for you to point to. So instead of having to build your entire DVN from scratch, right, and do it all yourself, this library now has a handy pointer that enables you just an easy happy path configure to that new validation technique.
No, it makes sense. The advisor, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, just trying to unmute. Can you, correct? Maybe I don't think maybe I missed it, but can you maybe point to the key differences between V2 and V1? Like what are like the key upgrades that made you guys go? Because I'm sure that because of the immutable nature of layer 0 and every protocol that's immutable, it's like I'm pretty sure that you don't roll out another version until you kind of have to, because then it's out there and people are going to use it like forever, pretty much. And it's like you can't. Never mind. Let me try and do it again.
Definitely. When Layer 0 v1 first launched, we had different assumptions about what applications wanted when sending messages from point A to point B. So I'll give you an example. With v1, the way that messages are actually verified and delivered are all in order by default. What we thought was that applications all would want to make sure that messages are always executed in the exact order that they arrive in, right? So that you have this kind of permanence of nonces being executed. But what we found is that if you're just moving token balances, for example, like sending token from point A to point B, you don't exactly care about what order they arrive in. So if a message fails, you don't want to have other payloads potentially blocked waiting for that message to be retried and executed. So with layer 0 v2, we implemented what we call lazy nonce enforcement. So what that means is basically...
Can you say the term again?
Yeah, lazy nonce enforcement. Another keyword, I'm sure, right?
The phrase this time. Yeah.
Right. But the gist of it is to keep it pretty simple. Basically, layer 0 v2 allowed messages to be executed out of order they arrive in. You can still configure that message to be executed in strict order, but the point of that being is that now we were able to unlock a huge throughput increase for messages, because now there's no try-catch logic on the destination chain checking to make sure at first, hey, we know the message is verified. Should we execute it exactly in this order every single time? Now with layer 0 v2, once a message is verified, it can be executed. And there's specific logic on the destination chain that basically says you can execute any message as long as it's from this point of previous message execution to the highest gapless verified message. So TLDR, all that means is basically if I have nonce 1 here, nonce 2, nonce 3, for me to execute nonce 3, I need to make sure that nonce 1, 2, 3 are verified, right? But what that meant for the protocol with V2 is that suddenly we were able to unlock this massive increase in throughput for the protocol. So for some chain pathways, we're able to deliver messages from point A to point B in less than 15 seconds, which is really, really valuable for the developer and very, very useful for your user, right, that has this concept of abstracted chains. And what that enables roughly from the protocol side is that also a lot of gas optimization. Instead of needing to check, right, that every message is executed in the exact order it is and then store the payload every single time, we were able to unlock a lot of both throughput and then also gas efficiency for the average developer that in 99% of cases won't actually need that logic, and instead make it more of a configurable module where if my application needs those messages to have that specific logic, it can be implemented within the application and then also within your execution logic.
Man, this is so huge.
Mm-hmm.
Like really the scope of what you like. As you're talking, I'm like, I'm thinking about stuff, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I can think of a wider protocol in crypto, something that really tries to fully tackle, it seems, the concept of interoperability. And it still seems like I'm still very curious to the question of like, can it actually work? Like for example, can I now as a user, maybe to try and maybe like take us back to the left curve side of things, which I like
Mhm.
if, for example, I have some activities that I do on mainnet, and I only do them on mainnet because most of the opportunity right now for me personally as an investor, I see it basically most of it is on mainnet, like just like most of the liquidity. Like on the one hand, they say that liquidity within crypto is so fragmented. But to be
Mhm.
honest, at the current moment, in my opinion, it's not that fragmented in general because it's pretty much all on Ethereum. You know what I mean? So for me, like, for example, as a user, I'm very curious. Like, will I be able to do a lot of the stuff that I do currently on mainnet, and just like I don't know, be on Arbitrum or Optimism or whatever network that is kind of cheap, and like will I actually be able to do the same activities that I'm doing wherever I'm doing, I don't know, on Curve or whatever, but all of a sudden like, and I can find like a trick way to actually do these when I'm on Arbitrum and not paying as much fee. Like it sounds like something I'm imagining, like until I actually get to one day maybe do it, like I won't actually believe that it's possible because of how used I am to know, if you want to enjoy these like curve yields, go on mainnet.
Mhm.
Like you're gonna pay sometimes $50 to $100 fee for a transaction because you want to play in the big leagues.
Right.
It
I
costs money.
think, yeah. I think as a actual user, right, who's interacting with these applications, what that means for you is that now there will be new applications that are built using layer zero where suddenly the experience of having to do any arbitrary action on your destination chain. Let's say I love Arbitrum as my source chain for everything, right? I do everything from Arbitrum, but I want to still tap into some unique advantages. Let's say, for example, on Verichain, they
Yeah.
have their proof of liquidity consensus mechanism. They might have some other DeFi applications that I can't touch, but I still want to act from Arbitrum. There will be applications in place where not only can I move assets seamlessly to Berachain, for example, but then be able to interact with applications composably on top of them. So be able to stake different assets on that chain, all from Arbitrum, the source chain, without me, the user, having to do essentially anything. We've actually seen this become more and more like profound as the protocol's been out. Recently, about a month and a half ago at ETH Denver, Token Bound announced ERC 6551 using layer zero. ERC 6551 is token bound accounts, right? So NFTs that essentially hold underlying assets and can do actions on behalf of a user, right? Uh, they are natively now cross chain with layer zero. And so what that means is that you suddenly have this domain space where, because layer zero enables developers to move any arbitrary data from point A to point B, you can abstract whatever inputs you want, whether that's a NFT, the metadata of an NFT, and move it to point B, whether that's a wallet balance, whether that's a token, whether that's more intricate design patterns like these token bound accounts, but suddenly have interactions where I start from point a user says, I want to do this, this, and this on the destination for me. It will go through layer zero and execute all those messages on your behalf, do the staking, do the transfer of NFTs, do the transfer of whatever accounts you want. But what that really means as a user is that suddenly this experience of working between multiple blockchains is much easier. I don't have to go and even interact with this destination chain. I don't have to push the confirm transaction button twice for every chain that I'm on, right? You're able to push a button once and then have it propagate to every possible point in the network with layer zero, all on your behalf without you needing to do anything as a user.
And what about the money? Of course, like also it doesn't cost as much, if I understand correctly, right? Like because like for example today, if I want to bridge like these assets from here and there, like many times I don't even do the whole thing, not because it takes too much time, but because like I
Mhm.
do, I'm a very small investor and I do like my little calculations and like, okay, never mind. Like it costs too much money to bridge there right now anyway. So
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, this can actually be solved in a lot of ways. Like we even saw this. We were at ETH London a month ago. A team basically built a cross-chain account abstraction module for voting on different DAOs on different destination chains. So as a user, I could basically submit my vote on chain from, let's say, Arbitrum, and this account abstraction would pay for all of the gas costs needed to go and submit my vote on any destination chain.
what?
But yeah. Because layer zero is just using base smart contracts, any smart contract method that you can do on a blockchain can be applied now to moving messages cross chain.
Wow, I think that like I'm pretty sure that even within the industry, like how many people are even like scratching the surface of new opportunities that this kind of stuff is gonna put out, guys. Like, what do you think, Matt? What do you think about the level of understanding within, even inside the crypto community, of just how big of an opportunity is emerging here?
Yeah, to be honest, it's not that large, right? Like I think, part of the reason that we're doing a lot of kind of like evangelism, Crack is great, going to a lot of these conferences and speaking is to kind of educate a lot of the developers on like what's happening behind the scenes. Most people, if you ask them like what is layer zero, they'll tell you like layer zero is a bridge, right? Like they don't know too much about like the actual protocol, what's happening underneath. Like you could build a bridge on layer zero, but we're not like an actual like liquid bridge ourselves. But there are like a ton of applications that are like now understanding like the potential of what you could build on layer zero. I think if you look at the scope of DeFi and like how cross chain has worked in the past, it's literally just copy paste protocols on different networks, and they called that like a cross chain protocol. But now, as Crack was explaining, you can actually do like some really cool, unique things where you can have one protocol here, have a different protocol there, and send a message to do one cool thing there, another cool thing, and bring it back. So now instead of just like duplicating protocols across networks, you can kind of have one functionality here, a different functionality on a different chain, and another different functionality on another different chain, and kind of just compose on top in a very unique way that has never been possible before. And so like a lot of really cool applications are coming out and doing this on the gaming side, the DeFi side. We just mentioned like cross-chain governance is a really cool example of this as well. So the education is kind of spreading. A lot of developers are understanding and building really cool stuff with us. And I think you can expect within the next 6 to 12 months, like some really cool, dApps coming out and building like unique use cases on top of layer zero, and not just like copy and pasting their own protocol on different networks and, calling that like cross chain.
Yeah, I saw a
All
really
right,
cool example of
can we
this
maybe
actually.
get a bit into these integrations? Like, what? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the advisor, I saw a really cool
You're
example of this. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah.
I know.
So
I also know that
I
I
s-
think you have like a personal angle there as well, no? But maybe we can get to
yeah,
later.
exactly. So I saw this money market aggregator that was building with Layer Zero, and it was really, really cool because I am someone who has like ETH on like 10 different chains. And like it is a bit annoying sometimes, but this was really cool because you could go on one money market on one chain, let's say Arbitrum, provide your collateral there, go to a different money market on a different chain, and borrow from there. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, there's like some really cool stuff you can build with like message passing in general, right? Like you can stake on one chain, unlock that collateral from a different network, do really cool stuff there, and back and forth. So yeah, that's one example. Like an omni-chain lending market is, really unique and cool. Obviously, there's, a lot of work to be done to make that as efficient as possible. But in general, like that is one of the most powerful use cases in DeFi of like how you can use like generic message passing to kind of unlock that capability.
Yeah, that was one of the coolest
Yeah.
things I've seen.
On that point too, there is another protocol that we were working with. I can't say too much like specifics on it, but the gist of their implementation was that they're working on essentially doing this type of fund transfer where you lock on a source chain, You get an acknowledgement that those funds have been created on the destination chain. Those funds can then be taken to any other point within Layer Zero's network for lending, for loaning, whatever it may be. But there's this really, really cool vision of Layer Zero where, as gas costs keep decreasing. We saw it with EIP 4844. As it becomes easier to start sending more and more messages on the chain itself, you can kind of have this network of transactions where one Layer Zero source input could trigger you communicating with 3 or more different chains, all doing different actions on each chain, whether it's for just data propagation. We've seen this for like governance votes, for example, right? Where users can vote for governance on any chain, but then it gets all routed back to Ethereum for settlement. It enables you to kind of build these experiences that tap into some native property about the chain itself, whether that's Berachain for proof of liquidity, whether it's Ethereum for settlement, etc., and really, really kind of unlock new application use cases that are fundamentally cemented in the properties of the chain itself, which I think is the coolest paradigm for any developer listening to tap into.
I know, I agree. I can't wait for it. I'm so excited.
Waj, can you maybe share a bit about, and we can edit it out if we don't want to, by the way, but maybe you can share a bit about like the kind of stuff that's going to be possible with the project you're involved with, which I know is launching on Berachain. And then like all of a sudden, if Layer Zero is already involved, and can you describe maybe the process there, that all of a sudden, instead of like needing to go on Berachain and then using your protocol, I don't know if I'm allowed to even mention it or not, but like all of a sudden, can I be using it like from wherever I am already and not even needing to bridge?
Yeah, you probably could. So the protocol is a 0-day to expiry option market. And it uses margin. So essentially what you could do is, let's say if the advisor, you have collateral on Arbitrum, you could lock it there, and then you could go to Berachain and use Layer Zero. Using Layer Zero with that message, you could use that collateral as margin and open your trades like that.
But like, guys, maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about. But like, how is the like for the user itself, or like for the end user? I mean, how's it even like gonna look? Like, are we even gonna know? Like, am I as an end user gonna have any idea whether the dApp that I'm using currently is using Layer Zero, or like, do you know like what
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, the end goal is eventually, hopefully not, right? Like same thing with like TCP/IP. Like people who use like applications on the internet, like you're using right now, like how we're speaking, like we don't talk about like, oh, are you using TCP/IP for like how this is working? Like like I think the end goal for Layer Zero is like we want to be so ubiquitous in terms of like applications building on us that it's not like like we're like a household name in terms of like an actual dApp, like a consumer application. We want to be the info layer that facilitates sort of like any sort of like cross-chain potential, right? And so I think there are a lot of users that are already using Layer Zero, probably without knowing they're using Layer Zero, and I think that's a good thing. And I think for the developer, we want to unlock for developers, as much as we can on that side.
I think that will come with time, like the abstraction of a lot of this stuff anyway. I mean, the advisor, you probably have used Layer Zero in some way, shape, or form. I guarantee you have. But this stuff will just over time just get even more abstracted away. Eventually we'll come to a point where we don't know what chain we're using. And we'll just have like interfaces, and they are like on all of these different chains. And in the background, they'll be using technologies like Layer Zero.
Like, by the way, guys, how touching on the great point that Wedge is making there, like, how big is Layer Zero currently? Like, what are the odds that like the common crypto user is already actually using it and has no idea that it's going on? Because I know that at least for me, like, I always think that I know what I'm using. Like, meaning. I'm like I don't know if I'm like a very conservative user on many ways. I think like I'm on this chain, and then if I want to get to on another chain, then I ask like, what's the best bridge, or go to a bridge I know, and then I like do the whole process of bridging, and I'm like concentrated and focused that I'm doing the right things. Like, I'm definitely not aware of, like if stuff is happening in the background that facilitates the whole process. Like maybe, for example, if I'm using a specific bridge, it's possible that I'm using a layer 0, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, Crack could probably go into more details as well, but because layer zero is like, or like bridging is like a subset of layer zero, there's probably other actions you might have performed that use layer zero rails underneath. But for context, I just went to layer0scan.com where you can kind of see some of the metrics. There's around 48,000 smart contracts live in production that use layer zero tech, which is quite extensive across 62 different networks. So if you're talking about like in terms of like scale, like there are like hundreds and hundreds of dApps that use layer zero technology. That the OFT is like one of the highest in demand in terms of like integrations, and so token transfers by large or like the majority, but I think that's going to slowly scale out to be unique to other use cases as well. But yeah, 48,000 smart contracts currently live in production that use layer zero.
Yeah, I think I need to find the tweet from Brian, the CEO, but there's a tweet floating out there in the ether somewhere about layer zero being, I think, a transaction in like every 10th like ETH block or something like that. There are quite literally like millions of transactions that get submitted on these 62 plus different networks. So it's pretty extensive in terms of interactions too. So many apps are building on top of layer zero, and this is why we view ourselves as a primitive, right, akin to Bitcoin and Ethereum, that eventually you absolutely will hit this point where you may not know it, but you probably have used layer zero for some type of transfer you've done cross chain.
And you also mentioned 50 billion in volume.
Yeah, in terms of like value transferred across, the different networks that we're on, around probably more than 50 billion at this point. That continues to grow. If you look at the number of messages we sent, it's like around 121 million messages between chains. So it's a lot, but I think this is like very minuscule, like a long grand perspective of things. So yeah, a lot is to come.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot now, like 50 billion, and if things go the right way, then 50 billion is going to be like the very beginning of the graph, like before you even see it start rising. Because I think that like if it's actually hopefully going to the places that you guys are working for it to go, then probably, I don't know, that's probably like can happen in like a day or a few transactions.
Yeah, we'll be using trillions and quadrillions.
Yeah, like like once actual capital starts really flowing in and going all around, especially if this kind of technology is hopefully actually gonna bring uh, really a much more like smooth experience just throughout the net, because I really think that you guys are offering probably the most different approach that I've ever heard of about this whole thing of instead of like every one of us like being on his own little island where he can do whatever he does, this whole competition of who can really connect the whole thing is one of the most important thing. Not only important, like it's one of the most interesting like things to watch and like observe, in my opinion, within the industry. And I know that ever since I heard about layer zero, I was kind of curious about it. But at first, I was also like, okay, like how different can it be? It's like it all sounds the same. Like when you don't know what you're talking about, it all sounds the same. And only after a while, like you start knowing and learning a bit more, and you're like, okay, wait a minute, that's not the same at all. Like and like for me personally, when the first time I really started looking at it differently, I think was when I when I heard Matt from another Matt from Tapioca DAO, which I know is like should be like at least the way I heard it, like the biggest protocol to launch on layer 0 v2 yet. And he was referring to something like the fact that with layer 0, it's not actually bridging, it's like sending messages all around. So the whole concept is not really what people used to think when they think of Omni and bridges. And for me, like when I heard it a few months ago, I was like, oh wait, okay, I have no idea. I don't even know like what it is at all, and I have to get back to reading some stuff and clarifying some concept because I really mixed up some stuff. And by the way, if you guys can maybe like shed some lights on that, and maybe a bit even on Tapioca as well, because I do know that there's a very strong connection between Tapioca and Layer Zero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, happy to jump in there. I think first, probably good to clarify what omni-chain fungible tokens are, right? You mentioned it just now that you thought of Layer Zero and you thought, wait a minute, this isn't bridging tokens, this is just bridging data, right? And if you think about it, all an ERC20 token is just data that's stored on a ledger, right? So when I have an ERC20 deployed on Ethereum, when I transfer tokens and send money to someone else, I'm not actually moving anything literally. I'm just updating this balance in the contract ledger saying, hey, deduct this balance from my wallet, credit it to this wallet. And so what we took with that was, well, if all an ERC20 is just this debit and credit logic, there's nothing stopping us from taking that data about how much money to credit to someone's wallet and just move that onto another cross-chain environment, onto another blockchain. And so an OFT, the way you can think about it, is a contract that you can deploy just like ERC20. It is an ERC20 token, and you can deploy it on your source chain, your destination chain, connect them together using that application configuration that we talked about. And then whenever I send tokens to someone, all I'm doing is actually debiting those tokens on the source ledger from my account, sending a message via Layer Zero to the destination chain, and then telling it to credit those tokens to a destination wallet. And so this method of debit and crediting is incredibly similar to just how a base ERC20 token works. The only difference is I've now abstracted it across two contracts that sit on one on chain A, one on chain B. And what that enables is that now you don't need a bridge to move those tokens. You can natively just use Layer Zero to send those balances that are omni-chain fungible tokens without needing to necessarily pay a bridging fee, without necessarily needing to rely on some third-party bridge configuration. You, as a developer of your ERC20 token, now own that configuration directly. And so it makes the actual space, I think, a lot more interesting for developers who are trying to go cross-chain with their tokens. And the added benefit there is that these OFTs are now, composable. You can use Layer Zero to kind of extend functionality on the destination chain. Stargate, for instance, has made it incredibly easy to integrate OFTs that you've deployed into the Stargate protocol itself. And so this kind of domain space is really, really useful. What Tapioca and those guys have been doing has basically been taking this concept of OFTs and really kind of extending upon it using some of those execution features that I mentioned earlier, right? Being able to say, all right, we have token transfers that are occurring. How do we extend logic composably? Matt probably is a little more familiar, honestly, with kind of a key of these kind of integrations, right, that we've seen across all these different chains.
By the way, guys, I'm just finding out something kind of funny. Sam says that he kept the restream. He pressed something that he doesn't usually press or something like that, and actually the whole thing is streamed live without us even knowing it. He just took it off the Leviathan account, but it's still streaming on my X, just with the wrong head title. So I will delete it a bit soon. But for at least some people, maybe they got some a preview of the show, so it's kind of funny. So I wanted to share it with you guys. He just told me it a few minutes ago, so I apologize about that. Well, it's a great way to market the content. I guess. I think it's gonna push the episode very strongly. What?
Let's hope so. Yeah.
So basically, every project can decide to also build on this OFT standard.
So existing tokens can definitely still use the OFT standard through the adapter contracts. New projects that are building and deploying new tokens can do that natively. So it doesn't matter which way you choose. You can still leverage the OFT contracts.
Yeah, to kind of expand on and kind of tie it into everything we've already talked about, right? The base protocol just allows you to move any arbitrary data. So the way that looks from like a contract perspective is I take any arbitrary inputs. Let's say I want to say hello world on the destination chain, right? I can encode that message as a bytes payload. Those bytes get delivered to the destination chain. As a developer, I can unpack those bytes into the actual data types that they are and then use those data types however I want. So the OFT standard takes us one step further just to make it easier for developers working with us, right? It takes the OAP standard, which is this arbitrary messaging contract standard about how to encode data and then send it using layer 0 with those different configurations for your security stack, your executor, those things that I mentioned, takes the OAP as a module, and then it takes an ERC20 token, packs them together, and says, hey, whenever an ERC20 wants to send a token cross-chain, use this OAP contract standard to encode all of those transfer inputs as bytes, deliver them to the destination chain, unpack those inputs as the data types that they are, so the amount of tokens to actually debit and credit, right? And then credit those tokens to the user on the destination chain. And like Matt said, because it's just this seamless configuration where you have this messaging module plus the token, you can either deploy that token all together with the ERC20 and the OAP bundled, or take an existing ERC20 token and this adapter contract and have the exact same workflow happen between chain A and chain B.
How do you guys attract like builders into the ecosystem? Like I'm pretty sure that hopefully some of our or some builders are out there listening to it, maybe even live. But like, how can they like how can they first of all get like involved, and like where should they even like reach or go look for if they want to like have their projects built in a way that can really leverage on all the advantages, or at least some of the advantages that Layer 0 offers?
Yeah, so Layer 0, our DevRel team, we love to help new builders explore what you can actually tackle and start building with the Layer 0 protocol. I think as a developer, the first thing to look at to kind of understand how Layer 0 works is to look at our Omni-chain application standard. This is the backbone for any data movement between point A and point B. Once you understand that standard and have a good grasp of it, it unlocks kind of everything else on the protocol for you. In terms of where to get started, Layer 0, we're going to be at tons of events. We'll be, I believe, at Token 2049 and some future ETH Global events. So going to be helping a lot of developers out there just understand how to build on Layer 0. There's a lot of tutorials online that we've already done for building your first Layer 0 project, both the OFT and the OAP standard. Our documentation is something that we take a ton of pride in. So if you ever have issues with building on Layer 0, have questions about how to get started, you can go to docs.layer0.network. That will give you kind of the full playbook on how to start building on Layer 0. Any questions, throw in Discord, throw at me on Telegram, Twitter. Happy to get in chats, happy to answer them. I think as people start realizing kind of that the domain space of Layer 0 isn't just, oh, I'm bridging tokens, but bridging any information and what that unlocks for you, the user, we're going to see kind of this Cambrian explosion, right, of different applications getting built. Already we've seen it where we've had bridging protocols built, we've had lending markets built, we've had cross-chain wallet services built. These token-bound accounts are now just the start. We had the first token-bound account transaction actually happen at ETH London about a month ago. So it's all very, very fresh and tons of opportunity to explore.
How many projects are? Can you maybe, if you can even count it, like how many projects are in the ecosystem currently, building on it, like involved within it in a way?
Yeah, so because Layer 0 is permissionless, there's a bunch of projects that sometimes we don't even surface with, and they just build using our infra. And so the ones that we have talked with, there's probably a few hundred. Again, there's like I don't know the exact number of smart contracts. I think it's like 48,000 smart contracts live, again, using Layer 0 tech. And so, yeah, there are a bunch and a bunch more that are building. And, you know, as Crack said, he was working on the V2 docs, by the way, which are awesome. So it's much easier now for an application to just go right into the docs, see what they want to build and just build it out immediately without ever having to talk with us. Obviously, we're here if anyone ever needs support and wants to kind of speak with us directly. But in general, we are permissionless and public in that way. So there are a bunch of builders just building using our tech, and I get DMs all the time saying, "Hey, we just deployed our OFT, and I haven't spoken to them before, and they've just done it on their own." So kudos to the docs, and I think as time goes on, we're going to see a lot more permissionless and just like apps just using us in the background.
I'm curious about at least about a lot of stuff, but at least two other stuff that I want to ask you guys about. First of all, we've touched so much on what layer 0 is gonna improve and enable and like allow people to do, and just how big of a change it can actually bring into the industry once more and more people learn about it and actually know how to leverage on the infrastructure that you guys are building with it. I'm curious as to how is it sustainable for layer 0 itself? I don't know, as an entity, as a protocol, because I'm sure that layer 0 has to make money as well in order, and I'm sure that because if you guys really get yourself so entrenched in, then for sure there are many possibilities to monetize your services. So I'm very curious, where exactly are the places where layer 0 earns its living in a way?
For sure. I think the big piece that we talked about earlier actually is that we now have this kind of democratic way for people to decide what validation techniques are best and what execution techniques are best, right? And at Layer 0 Labs, what we feel is that we've been running the executor now for, I believe, 2.5 years, right? And throughout all that time, we've kind of run into, hey, these are a lot of the pain points of making billions of RPC calls, managing different gas amounts across different chains. And so for us, anyone can configure any execution technique that they want, but we believe that Layer 0 provides the cheapest and most efficient way to do it via our Layer 0 Labs executor. And so for us, we see kind of the revenue potential is basically competing with this free and open marketplace and continuously just putting out the best product, the best service for message execution. We think that doing it in this way will, one, provide a lot of benefit for us in terms of revenue, but obviously for two, the ecosystem, it creates this natural drive for us to constantly make sure that the product is as good as it could possibly be and make sure that this production asset, is keeping pace, because again, this is a permissionless and openly configurable protocol. If someone builds an executor that is beating the Layer 0 Labs executor, developers are going to switch to it. And so it gives us a really natural incentive to, one, be aligned with our developer community, and then two, make sure that we're adequately servicing them as best as possible.
Yeah, and a good way to kind of think about it, to kind of, jump on top of that as well, is it's similar to how consensus works on Ethereum, right? Like Ethereum as a protocol is permissionless. It's out there. Anyone can build on it. Same thing with Layer 0 as a protocol. Consensus is sort of like an entity that's building really cool products and services on top that just at the end of the day benefit the end user. Like MetaMask is a great wallet that hundreds of millions of people have downloaded already. So similar to that, right? Like Layer 0 as Labs as an entity, we're building really cool products and services that kind of build on top of the protocol that people can use, such as the executor. And so that's sort of like the relationship there.
And I also wanted to ask you guys about the way that the organization is structured and maybe the culture there. So first of all, I know that there's an entity called Layer 0 Labs, which I'm curious, does it own all of Layer 0? Is it how exactly is it structured? And I'm also wondering about it because I'm curious about is Layer 0 the technology itself? I mean, is it something that can all of a sudden, I don't know, the regulators can come and say, oh, wait a minute, when you do this and that, this whole network that you've built here, you should pay us this and this, or you should only validate whatever we tell you. So I'm kind of curious about that and the relationship between Layer 0 Labs and Layer 0 itself. Also, if there are any other entities involved.
Yep.
And also, I'm curious about the decentralization process of it, if it's something that is to occur at some point.
Yeah, so just as we were just explaining, right? Like the way to think about it is Layer Zero Labs as an entity is building products and services that kind of are just like good for the protocol itself. So Layer Zero is the protocol. Layer Zero Labs is the entity that's building out like the executors, a DVN, etc. So like that is like the separation between the two. Like the protocol itself can live on its own without even Layer Zero Labs ever existing. And so the way to think about you just asked about like centralization, like regulations, things like that. Because we've built on these three core principles of immutability, permissionless, and censorship resistance, our team, if we like disappeared off the planet like tomorrow, the protocol itself will continue to just work as is because anyone again can spin up their own DVN, anyone can verify messages, and anyone can also do the executor part and build their own as well. And even if there are no executors, again, you can still sign transactions, pay the gas fee, and actually execute yourself as the end user on Layer Zero Scan yourself. So you actually don't need to use executors if you don't want to. So the reason we built the protocol as it is, like it stands as a true protocol and not a service. If Layer Zero was a service and not a protocol and we disappeared, then yes, like the whole entire thing would just shut off. No one could use it. It's done for, right? And every application touching it, it can no longer use our services, quote unquote. But because we built it from scratch to be a true protocol with immutable smart contracts, they're there on the blockchain. As long as the blockchains are alive and survive, the protocol will always be there. And we can't turn that off. We can't change it. It will exist forever in perpetuity. And so in terms of like centralization risk, there really is none in that sense because we can't upgrade those contracts. We can't change anything. Anyone can spin up their own DVNs, their own executors, permissionlessly verify, and execute on your own. And so there is no liveness issue as a protocol itself.
The power of immutability, huh?
It's beautiful. We encourage more and more people to kind of really, take that into consideration.
I agree. One of the people I follow the most in the space, like maybe my favorite content creator, all due respect to Waj here, is Noah Seidman. I don't know if you know of Noah Seidman, Captain Rational. And I think that he mentions this fact a lot, like the fact that immutability is still so widely underestimated. Like the fact that, with all due respect, like an upgradable contract and an immutable contract, even for the people out there who are not really technical, like I can tell you from even on my level, I can tell you that just think about this core difference between these like two approaches. On one of them, you have no idea what's going to change tomorrow and who's going to decide what, and like it's there till proven otherwise. With an immutable contract, at least if you can actually be sure that it's immutable, and I'm not the one that can tell you if I can be sure if something is really immutable or not, but I know that if it's actually immutable, man, it's gonna do it like forever. Like you have no do your best to try and make it not do it forever, and bon voyage, as they say.
Exactly. And I think, building onto that point, right? Like you get a certain amount of guarantees, like in terms of like what you see in the code with immutable contracts. Like one thing that Primo always talks about is like how you can measure like security, right? And it's just like the amount of TVL that grows over time within contracts themselves. And with immutable contracts, that is like very true, right? Like the economic incentive for someone to find a bug, to find a hack only increases as TVL increases. So that's a good standard to go by. But with upgradable contracts, the minute you change that code, that time resets back to zero. And so it's like very difficult to kind of price in that risk as well as understand like what guarantees you get within that risk framework, which makes it very hard for applications, especially if you know that you're going to be doing hundreds of millions of transactions or transferring X amount of dollars between networks, because you just don't understand like what this is going to look at like 6 months from now or a year from now. Like how many times is the code going to change? What will that look like? Do I have to like monitor this 24/7? And so like, with immutable contracts, you sort of kind of get rid of that concept in general.
Rajab, do you have anything specific that you want to add? I know that I have I think two more small questions that I kind of, maybe one is not that small, that I want to ask. Do you have anything specific that you want to add maybe before?
Yeah, I guess moving on just a little bit. I'm a bit mindful of time. I know that we don't have too long left. But just could you talk us through a little bit about what we're going to see with Layer Zero in the coming 12 months? What kind of upgrades and stuff that's coming out, stuff even for users to interact with?
Yeah, I think in general, right, like Layer Zero Labs as an entity, we're continuously building really cool products. And so, I think this year we're going to be building a few that is going to be very beneficial to a lot of applications. Again, just building on the core protocol itself, Layer Zero messaging. I think we're more excited to kind of see how applications will use what's already out there with like V2, for example, to build really cool use cases. One of the more notable ones that just came out is like Athena protocol. They launch SUSDE and USDE as an OFT on V2, which is really cool. And they kind of use this DVN as like an example of like how you can choose from whatever party you want. So they're actually using an Axelar as a DVN within the Layer Zero OFT standard, which is pretty unique. And so that is like an example of what you can do with the OFT. And they're growing very rapidly. And the whole idea is now you can actually have this native, I guess, internet bond, aka some sort of like stable currency, to move across chains at literally the cost of gas. So now like you have this one-to-one, supply mint and burn without having to go through any liquidity pools on transfers. And what you can do with this is now you can actually compose on top of OFTs and do really cool stuff within DeFi applications, right? Like the whole idea is, if previously before OFTs, if I wanted to compose a bridge call, you have to, take care of like what slippage is going to look like, what price impact is going to look like on those transfers, because there is actual like liquidity pools on both sides. But with the OFT, because it's always one-to-one across networks, you can build some really cool applications that take advantage of that and compose on top of like OFT transfers themselves. And so super excited to see what people are going to build on top of OFT composability in general. But yeah, Athena is one example that just launched like literally a few weeks ago on V2 using the OFT.
Wow. So basically every existing protocol as well, like that's hearing this and like finding out about Layer Zero, can probably like do some stuff in order to really like unleash a lot of new potential, and like total addressable market, at least the way I see it. Like if they actually just do like the proper integrations, like it's not a zero-sum game. You know what I mean? It's quite the contrary. It's like okay, you want to open up a new world of possibilities, just do whatever you're doing already, but also tap into Layer Zero and enjoy a lot of the new benefits that it brings, like we've mentioned here. So it's actually it's one of the coolest. It's one of the things I'm most looking forward to see how they play out, especially because the Omni narrative is so big, and it's going to drive so much competition, in my opinion. And I must say, and again, like this is not financial advice, and I'm not objective or whatever, but something about the way the Layer Zero approach is just so elegant and different than the kinds of approaches that I've seen yet, that it definitely makes it like one of the most, one of the ones that I'm most curious about.
Yeah, I think you actually said it best. You said just now. You said just now that why wouldn't these teams want to tap into these different opportunities? Why I can't believe it's not a zero-sum game. And this is kind of the case with all of DeFi and all of crypto, right? The idea that as more and more applications get built that you can compose between, you suddenly unlock new, not only narratives, but new use cases for existing applications that you said are immutable, right? Using Layer Zero, you can not only connect new applications on the same network, but connect applications that are on any network, right? And this just is incredibly positive sum for the whole space, because it pushes more and more of what you can do, less into a chain narrative and more into this is the industry. You can access anything within the industry and use all of it, right? That's like the narrative that I really want to see kind of like develop with Omni-chain, honestly, over the next couple months. Touching on the other piece too for layer 0 to decentralize, right? Like Matt mentioned, actually, it's really fascinating because the protocol right now is actually fully decentralized, right? There's nothing in the code that anyone is blocked from doing permissionlessly, right? Anyone can run a DVN, anyone can run an executor, anyone can interact with these pieces. And so for us, kind of as the labs team and the entity, we really want to kind of see more and more people go in with like the mindset of, I want to run this validation method for layer 0. And like Polyhedra, for instance, did with their ZK bridge, right? If you have a validation technique that you think is novel, that no one is using for bridging, you think, gosh, why I want more people to be aware of it to go and use it, reach out to us and also start building it yourself. The protocol is permissionless. We're happy to help point you in the right way to get you started. But adding more validation into message passing and making interoperability more secure is a positive sum good that's beneficial for everybody, whether or not you're on layer 0 or not. And so would love to see more people start to integrate that.
Man, I could have kept going for like at least another half hour, Waj. I would keep asking and asking and asking because I first of all enjoyed so much like of your clear explanations, and I think the talk is also very informative, at least for me. But to be honest, I really like whenever we talk to teams, I always tell Waj and the others, we always like to have like at least 2 people from the team. Because I think that when there are 2 people from the team, you get like a specific hint or sense of the energy within the organization, which if you just get one guy, you don't really like often necessarily feel that energy as well. But often when you have like 2 or 3 members from a team, you kind of sense their like dynamics, like the way they talk to each other, like the way they interact and handle themselves. And for me personally, as someone that's very interested on these aspects as well, and not just the financial and technological aspects, I think that I'm also it gave me like a very nice glimpse to like the way I imagine it. I think that just like layer 0 is like an interoperability protocol at the end that's like supposed to connect the whole dots. Like I'm imagining layer 0 as like a pretty big layer 0 labs. I mean, maybe like a very big organization with many people from around the world that actually kind of like it's a reflection of the product that it's building. In a way, you know what I mean? And I think that's something that doesn't always like you don't always see this parallel situation of these guys are building something so much, but in the way they're like becoming what they're building, and it becomes like a circular process. And the way at least I see things, I think this kind of a resonation, it creates a specific resonation that someone is really so aligned with what they're doing that it affects them on several like scopes. And for me personally, at least, it's something that is really fascinating to me. I really enjoyed the time with you guys. I thank you for coming here a lot. Anything you guys want to add, mention that we didn't? I know we went through a lot, but I'm sure that I'm sure that we can go on for a whole lot more. So if there's anything you want to add, first of all, feel free to do it. And of course, Matt and Matt, thank you so much for your time. You've earned your Matt titles over there at Layer 0, that's for sure. Like they should give you another Matt title, in my opinion. And guys, thanks everyone for tuning in. Waj, anything to add, man?
No, I just want to say thank you. I'm a big fan of Layer 0, a big fan of using Layer 0 apps, and I will continue to do so in future. So yeah, thank you for enlightening us and the users, or the viewers, I should say, on the Layer 0 technology, some of the things on the background as well. I thought it was really insightful too. So thank you to both of you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us on. It was a pleasure. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us. For anybody listening who's just tuning in, head to docs.layer0.network and you'll find everything you need to know about getting building on Layer 0.
Amazing. By the way, where can they find you guys specifically? Like maybe on X, Discord? Does Layer Zero have a Discord, by the way? Like probably a big community?
We do, yeah. If you go to layerzero.network, the website, or docs.layerzero.network, the Discord should be linked right there if you scroll to the bottom. As far as for me on X, you can find me at unkrakable, spelled like my last name. So super into immutability there too.
That's great. What about you, Matt? If you want
feel free to hit me up on X or Twitter. My handle is just PaikCapital, so PAIK and then capital. Or hit me up on Telegram if you want to talk Layer Zero. It's just LZ Matt, and then we can definitely chat there.
Amazing, guys, amazing. Really, thank you again for coming. I really think this was informative and was one of the episodes that really I enjoyed the most. Layer Zero, what a huge product, guys. I definitely recommend you check it out and like at least try to find ways to interact with it. And hopefully we're going to have a lot new possibilities because of builders like yourselves building new solutions and new technologies that will enable us to really, like we said earlier, to not play zero-sum games, but to keep leveling up our games and reach newer markets and new opportunities. So Matt and Matt, thanks a lot for coming, guys. Thanks everyone for watching. Waj, thanks a lot, my brother. Great job, man. Really enjoyed this one as well. And see you on the next Send It. And Layer Zero as well.